Before I introduce you to my next guest today, I want to make sure that you're aware of two new resources to help you to increase your productivity, clarify your purpose, and improve your communication skills. The first one is our Facebook community called Leadership with Purpose. So it's a private community. So go to Facebook groups, search for Leadership with Purpose, and send a request to be invited into the group. There's a few questions for you to answer, and then live to have you a part of that community of other like-minded leaders. Our team is really excited about launching the Next Level Coaching Roadmap. It's a group coaching format, so highly recommend that you check that out and to get your questions answered. If you're a leader that's experiencing any of the following, this is definitely a group format that's going to help you break through to your next level within leadership and your career. So if you have any fear about moving to the next level in your leadership career, this is a group that you'll want to connect with. If you have loss of confidence, if you're kind of confused, like not knowing really how to tap into the hidden job market, if you have a desire to really to grow to the next level, this is definitely a group that you'll want to be able to connect with. If you want to know how to stay calm in a high stress environment, there's going to be strategies, tips, and resources, conversations all around how to develop skills to do just that. So if you want more information, head over to warrenwandling.com/the next level coaching. And in there on that page, you'll notice more information about the coaching roadmap, but also there's a link for you to schedule a phone call with me so we can help really figure out if this is the right fit to helping you take your career to the next level. Okay, again, that's warrenwandling.com/the next level coaching. Well, welcome back to another episode of How to Become an Obstacle Buster. I'm your host, Warren Wandling, the show that's dedicated helping leaders and entrepreneurs to overcome their obstacles, build resilience, and achieve success. And today I have a great guest with me today, Bill Coletti. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hey, Warren, it's so exciting to be here. I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, I am as well. As a C-suite advisor, global crisis communication and reputation management strategist and speaker, tell us about your business.
Yeah, so we do crisis communications. We help organizations prepare and defend themselves when their actions and public perception get misaligned.
Wow, that's fascinating work. And certainly in today's social media, I am sure that is more prevalent than in the years past.
Absolutely. Social media has just accelerated things significantly and really changed the dynamic. And it's also really important to be able to determine smoke versus fire, because not everything rises to the level of a crisis that requires you to work with me. So there's a little bit of discernment, but things are absolutely moving fast.
So what is the greatest obstacle then that your clients encounter?
Man, it's such a great question. So the greatest obstacle that our clients are faced with are there's multiple ones. I don't think there's one greatest. I think it's indecision and uncertainty. What is this? And I mentioned smoke versus fire. So I think as we let's frame ourselves. We've got an organization and they get a few criticisms of a product on social media. That's not a crisis. That's a business problem that they need to solve. They need to address it via customer service channels and some tactics to get that offline. But if there's a sexual harassment or a data breach or, God forbid, an industrial accident, something really, really significant, that's really where we're involved. And in that context, the greatest obstacle for our clients is for them to indecision and figuring out what to do next. And so I've got a theory around the differentiation between good and great crisis communications, which helps break up and sort of bust some of those obstacles.
Well, interesting. So within that difference between good to great, can you share with our listeners kind of just part of that formula that helps you to determine kind of the next steps?
Sure. So I believe that in crisis response, and again, a distinction from someone complaining about you on social media, a true crisis that impacts the reputation of your organization. The key differentiator between good and great crisis response is speed. How fast can you respond? But speed is made up in a couple of different factors. It's not simply fast for the sake of fast. I believe that there is your mission and values. What do you stand for, organization? What's really important to you? Add that with your chain of command back to decision making. That then equals speed, because back to your primary question about the obstacle is that if you don't really know what you stand for, your mission and values, you can't really figure out who you're speaking to and who's most important to you. And if you don't know your chain of command, both formally and informally, you don't know who needs to be in the room, who needs to be aware, what experts are you going to listen to, then that's an obstacle as well. And that's where that indecision comes in, is because you don't know who you're talking to and you don't know who's helping you make a decision. And that's where organizations really get slow. So the equation is speed equals the sum of your mission and values plus your chain of command. That's what makes you fast, and that's what makes great crisis response.
Wow, that's fascinating. I think what's key, what's interesting is companies can have set their mission or values, but if an organization doesn't really live out those values, when they find themselves in this crisis mode, do they have a challenge then to embrace that mission and values because they haven't communicated that either to their clients as well as to their organization?
Yeah, that's such a wonderful insight that you picked up there. Absolutely. And so when you think about kind of high reputation firms that really aspire to do something meaningful in the marketplace, they clearly understand their mission and values. And Warren, I'm sure just like me, you have rolled your eyes and have clients that roll their eyes at this. Oh no, not another mission and values
Right.
exercise. And oh my gosh, a bunch of navel gazing for a half a day. It is really, really important. At a minimum, it's important of, at the center of our bullseye, who matters most to us. That's why you articulate mission and values. At the center of the bullseye, are we going to apologize when something wrong, or are we just going to stand rock ribbed and just take it on the chin? Those are things why I think mission and values are really important, and that's why you need to pull that through. And so many people write them down, pin them up on the poster board, but never live them. To your great question, they never live those mission and values because they don't pull through in the day-to-day operations. And that's almost as good as not having one if you don't really live it.
Right, exactly. I'm sure that's when part of that crisis from that difference between good to great is then the speed side, right? If they understand and embrace them, that's going to be faster to decisions because they'll know the messaging, how to communicate to their customer base as well as to their employees.
Absolutely, because they've thought it through, and it's really, they're really, really clear, and just put it into its simplest form. Your mission and values will, in a crisis context, will help you articulate who's most important. Are our employees most important? Are our customers most important? Are our shareholders most important? Is our board of directors most important? Is the regulator that has oversight most important? Thinking about those things in advance and pulling them through into some sort of mission and values will make you fast. And I'm agnostic on which one of those are. All five of those are completely legitimate. And sometimes it's not always, when we've clearly disproven the customer's not always right. Sometimes you got to push back a little bit and do a better job of explaining. But thinking those things through, back to mission and values, and that just those five that I illustrated are really critically important.
So your experience within building and growing your business, what was a key strategy that contributed to building your success?
Oh, I think that growing and building success is it's about reputation. I think it is. We grow our business by referrals and word of mouth. We have been so blessed with companies that we've worked with over the years. I've been fortunate enough to started doing politics and then transitioned over into this form of my agency. Is that it's the greatest strategy is that I keep really close to a network of of ambassadors and friends and colleagues and former clients, even though they stopped paying me, but I still stay in touch with them. So I think that is really, really critically important, is because they've allowed us to grow. I think that while that is core to what we've done, I think meeting new people and meeting new people like you, participating in this podcast, we're having a conversation with people that know you but don't know me. And so I think that's the second part. Number one is keeping those ambassadors, those allies that we have very close to us, but it's also meeting new people and giving them high value and useful insights is really the two best strategies that we have to grow our business.
Yeah, reputation is really key, right? In reference to building and maintaining that reputation over the course of your career and keeping close to those networks. And I love what you said in reference to staying in contact with their close network. Maybe you're not engaged within a project with them currently, but you still engage with them in conversation because you can gain insight, and you never know when that next referral might come your way as you build relationships.
And Warren, I just to take that down the path a little bit. Just had a conversation last week with a woman formerly at a client that we had served for a number of years, and she oversaw our departure, which is a nice way of she fired us. She oversaw our departure as a consultant, and the CMO changed, and things changed. It wasn't adversarial or anything. It just things change, and that's all
Right.
part of the consulting business, and it's not a big deal. But she oversaw that, and then she kind of we didn't have a relationship at all. But she lost that job and was looking for a new job, and a mutual friend reintroduced us, and I happily took that call. I mean, that when she let us go, she certainly wasn't my favorite person of the day. But now, I think we're actually going to be helpful, find at least a consulting project moving forward. So I think that's life's too short to worry about that stuff. So I believe in those relationships are really important.
Yeah, that's really key. So, what can leaders learn from large companies about crisis management?
Yeah. Um, well, sometimes they can learn the wrong lessons, and there's a lot to learn in the wrong
Right.
side as opposed to the right as opposed to the right side. So I think that what they can learn in that negative context. So let's sort of stay there in that negative context is they can learn the punishment that comes from a slow response. Smaller organizations have a greater ability to respond faster, have a greater ability to be closer and touch their customer. And so when Starbucks, Walmart, BP, pick large United Airlines, pick large companies, they sometimes have a really hard time sort of getting people to hear and understand their story. But a local bank or a regional lumber provider or someone at a 50-person insurance agency that had a problem has a greater ability. So the thing they can learn is they can learn the cost of being slow and not responding quickly in a crisis. The other thing that you can learn, a lot of big organizations work with us to do crisis simulations where they actually sit with organizations and actually exercise the ability to actually simulate crisis response. And while you don't need to stand up a full crisis simulation, I think leaders that are listening to you and some of the content that you put out will appreciate this. Simply asking the questions, what if this had happened to us? Pull out the newspaper, point at a headline and say, what if this had happened to us? And so I think the learning from large corporations, large companies, is that organizations can learn the importance of training, planning, and preparation. And it can be as simple as pulling out the paper and asking a simple question.
Yeah, I love that strategy and asking the what if questions if it happened to us, because it's easier to answer and to simulate that question when you are not in the heat of the moment of dealing with a crisis yourselves. So it's just being prepared.
And leaders can then interrogate their leadership team, and I don't say interrogate is a negative word. Just ask some questions of your leadership team. You can learn all kinds of things. And I had a small business client do that recently, and they found out, man, we don't have insurance for XYZ, and that's a very insurable task. We can, or a very insurable risk. And so just by, it doesn't need to be the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. You pull out your industry trade publication or a blog post, case study, and share it and say, what if, and then ask some questions around it. It's a really great exercise.
Yeah, that sounds like a great exercise. Well, I'm really curious, Bill. What is the mindset or behaviors that separate leaders from performing best during a crisis?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I love this phrase that I've developed over time is that the crucible of crisis doesn't develop your skill sets, it reveals it. And
Hmm.
so
Wow, that's awesome.
The mindset and behavior of those that do well is the understanding that crises can happen, and the understanding that it can happen to you, and that when it does happen and your skill sets are revealed, are you going to like what you see? And so this ability to think 360, these things could happen, ability to sort of ask yourself those what if questions, stand up in front of the mirror and am I ready to be on camera? Can I do this? What would I say to our employees if something like this were to happen? And so the first thing of mindset is these things can happen and I need to be ready for it. Behavior is, am I practicing how I show up? And when I show up, am I practicing what it looks like? So those are the behaviors. So I think those are two really important components of when leaders is one, understanding that it can happen, and then two, being prepared and practicing what that crucible is going to look like, so that you're actually like what you see when it gets revealed.
And then with clients, then do you actually go through an exercise of physically practicing as a drill, a simulation in reference to if that did happen, kind of rolling out the messaging and delivering of what that would look like if it was actually a live process?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can do that as a live exercise where we actually get everybody together and we simulate real time exactly what's going on. We've got some technologies that we use so people can do it in a very safe environment, respond on Facebook, respond on Twitter, but doing it in a walled garden so that you don't have to worry about, the exercise. And then we
Mm-hmm.
also just do it as a simple tabletop exercise where we actually roll out and we actually have the CEO or the general counsel or whomever, the spokesperson, actually make and craft media responses in real time. So it really forces people to think and perform on their feet, and it also lets people sort of test out the holding statements and test out the materials that they may have already put in place.
So when you're first working with a client in that process and they've never experienced that before,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of pushback do you get in reference to developing that right response?
Oh, things like that'll never happen to us.
Uh-huh.
That's unrealistic. We're too small, we're too big, we'll fill in the blank. That's not the way it would go down for us. We'll also get pushback of, it's going to take too much time to get operations, legal, executive, HR, communications. It's going to take too much time
Uh-huh.
to get all those people in a room, and we don't have time for all that kind of stuff. Those are some common pushback. Too expensive. And my response to that is, we'll go do the what if exercise. Just do something that what if absolutely costs you the price of whatever it costs for you to buy the New York Times. So it is not very expensive for you to do that what if exercise. I also think the pushback is, well, I don't want to overtrain for a data breach, because the reality is it might be something else. And that's a legitimate pushback. That's actually a very good pushback, so that you don't over exercise for things that are relatively straightforward. You want to exercise kind of the black swans so that you're better prepared.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess also just getting comfortable being uncomfortable in the process of going through that crisis mode.
And doesn't really matter what you exercise. Absolutely. And so just that uncertainty, and you can talk about the fog of war, and you don't know the right person to ask, and your questions go unanswered. For leaders to feel and experience that, incredibly valuable. And just that the uncertainty of these situations is really valuable.
So, in your opinion, how important is the topic social risk and why leaders need to really understand the risk?
Yeah. So we think there's this new emerging category of risk, and that are these risks that we kind of call social risk. And what social risks are, these are risks that that impact populations. And so by that I'm talking about um, risks related to what we saw last summer in George Floyd. We just celebrated the 1 year anniversary and went through his trial. But the Black Lives Matter movement, we're seeing a lot of LGBTQ issues. We've seen a lot with issues related to pro-Trump, anti-Trump, pro-Biden, anti-Biden, progressives, moderates, impacts on access. So these are social risks. These are risks where populations are impacted. They talk about them on social media and they get amplified. The key component is that those publics are expecting corporations to have an opinion on those. It's no longer valid to say, well, hey, that's not my lane. I don't really talk about that. I don't need to have a position on some of these issues. So all of these social issues, we call them social risks, create real upside but potential downside for organizations if organizations if they mishandle them. And so the past 2 years we've really spent most of our time working with clients on how do you respond appropriately, authentically. How do you respond not to data breaches or active shooters or plane crashes, but how do you respond to these social risks, things that are impacting population? That's really where we've spent our time. So I think it's a critically important issue for organizations to think about.
So it sounds like that being silent on one of those social risk topics isn't really an option in today's environment.
It could be an option. If you are so disciplined and unconcerned about what backlash there may be, sure, that is always an option to do nothing. It's not often a very good one because while, Warren and Bill's barbershop, no one probably cares what we think about, global social issue X. I bet our customers worry about that. I bet the people that actually transact with us are curious about that, particularly if they're younger and millennials, they care about that. So you could make an argument that nobody really cares about Bill and Warren's barbershop, but there's also a lot of people that we do business with. They probably do care. And so I do think having an opinion or at least thought about some of these issues is really important for organizations, big or small.
So I think we both would agree that leadership is influence. Mm-hmm. So what is one of the top strategies that you share with your clients to help them increase their results around influence?
Yeah. So I think you increase your results around influence in 3 ways. And I think that, and particularly in a crisis context, is you need to understand yourself, understand who you are. And that revolves around how do we take information in? How do we distribute information? What are our parts and what are the pieces? Because these are really high stress situations. So I think increasing your influence, 1, is by understanding yourself. 2, excellent understanding of others. That's EQ, being able to read the room, understand your audience, being able to understand both your direct reports, people that are right there that are going to act out on your influence and use your influence, as well as then your broader communities, broader stakeholders that you might not be in dialogue with. And then 3rd is asking great questions. So I think if you understand yourself, you understand others, and then you understand the situation, that is the best way to push influence. That is the best way to get good decisions. And it's also the best way to communicate more clearly when you find yourselves in these crisis situations.
Yeah, I love that simplicity in reference to those 3 that you mentioned. But around EQ, even though it's been around 20 plus years, right? It's certainly in the last few years, certainly with COVID and the impact of building resilience, I think the importance of EQ has really increased for people to understand how to read the room and how they're responding to circumstances that they're dealing with.
And I'll take it one step further, is there's 2 axes, 2 new disciplines. I need to learn how to do that, not in my boardroom, but need to learn how to do that on Zoom. So that's a whole nother skill set to learn how to do that. And then there's just so much more complexity in what I'm looking at as I understand others. It used to be somewhat binary, or having a good day or having a bad day. There's so much more complexity around that. So not only is the venue, the medium, we're doing it on Zoom versus doing it in a board meeting where I can actually use all of my tools, my sensory tools, as well as kind of just the complexity of life that are impacting individuals.
Yeah, that's really an interesting point in reference to the impact of the complexity. I believe that that success leaves clues, and one of those clues are what books and authors that have influenced other leaders. So over the course of your career, what are some of the authors or books that have influenced you in your business?
Yeah, so I really like this gentleman named Dan Sullivan at an organization called
Oh,
Strategic Coach.
yeah.
So I think that's great stuff. I think his stuff is terrific. I think Simon Sinek, I love the way he thinks. I think the Infinite Game has really changed how I talk about some of the things, and so I thought that's been really helpful. I just finished a book called 4,000 Weeks. It's this concept that 4,000 is roughly the number of weeks that an 80-year-old person has to live, and it really changed my thinking around time management. And then I'm in the middle of rereading this book called Go Giver, which
Oh,
is a
wow. That's a
really,
great book. Yeah.
really, really great book. That's a handful that are out there. Gosh, there's so many that are out there that I really, really value. I try to, if someone takes the time to produce a book, while I may not make it all the way through, I try to find the one or two things that are really value. And so I've got lots of 2/3 finished books where I try to capture some of the ideas, but those are a handful of things. I'm also really keen on podcasts and people like you that are sharing insights and perspectives, whether their own and asking great questions or those of their guests. So I think we need to almost reframe that question of, you know, what podcast influenced you here the most recently? Because there's a lot of insight that's being shared there as well.
Yeah. Is there one podcast that stands out that you've connected with that comes to mind?
Well, it's a little guilty pleasure, but this one by Dr. Death, I just that story of I'm in Austin, Texas. So
Okay.
Wonder, it's a Wonder, it's a podcast company. I think it's Wonder. So that's been terrific. I think that I really, I don't listen to it all the time, but I find value in the Tim Ferriss stuff,
Oh,
maybe in the
sure.
way he
Yeah.
interviews. I'm curious about some of the topics are a little bit out there for me. But that Dr. Death I thought was fascinating, and it's a little bit of a guilty pleasure, just kind of a true crime story.
Sure. You bet. Well, you definitely showed some great thought leaders for our listeners to pick up if they have not already read their books or connected with them on social media. But one book that I'll have to add to my list is the 4,000 Weeks. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's a very good one. Very good one.
So, what does the future hold for you, Bill? Any special projects that you're working on?
Yeah. Warren, what an amazing question. And when we're recording this, so if you don't mind, I have a little bit of a story about change and the entrepreneurial journey. So I had built my firm and prepared. We've been in business about 7 years. I had built my firm in preparation for a 3-month sabbatical. So August, September, October, I was to have been on a 3-month sabbatical. We own a sailboat and was going to be sailing, take our boat down to Grenada in the Caribbean, and we were going to spend 3 months down there. But on July 10th, I had a motorcycle accident, and really messed up my foot, broke my clavicle, 7 ribs, ICU, chest tube, kind of all the gnarly stuff that happens. And so I'm just now beginning to be weight bearing and ability to walk a little bit without aid. And so the future was going to be a 3-month sabbatical, and I was going to come back the middle of November, charged and ready. And so the future right now is figuring out, how am I going to get down to my boat? Because COVID is on the brink of shutting down the island that my boat is at right now, which is certainly a big first world problem.
Mm-hmm.
But figuring out how to get my boat back. We are at a professional context. That's my personal segue. My at a professional context, we are launching Kith Academy. So we're our consulting business, everything you and I've talked about, but we are creating a training program for trusted advisors and understanding some of the things that we talked about, the mindset and behavior. So we're real excited about launching Kith Academy. It's this training program primarily for communicators that want to be great communicators and emerge into becoming trusted advisors for their organizations. So we're launching that at the end of the year, and then I'll be looking at joining more podcasts here in the future.
Very good. Well, excellent. Well, I definitely enjoyed our conversation today. If our listeners wanted to connect with you, which I know they will, what's the best way for them to be able to connect?
Yeah, it's funny. It sounds sort of old school, but our website is very easy to connect. It's KITH, kith.co. I try to share a lot of content there. We've got an email that we send. I send a weekly article that I'm about what I'm thinking about on crisis and reputation management. Same on LinkedIn. I'm the only Bill Coletti I believe that's on LinkedIn. So it's Bill, Coletti. And then pretty active on Twitter, and that's just BColetti. So those three places, our website, happy to share emails, but I'm pretty old school. You can find our phone number on the website. Just give a call. I love having conversations. And some of the best conversations I've had have been from some podcast listeners who just picked up the phone and gave a call. So it's, I typically don't have much to sell, but have lots to share. So love to have a conversation. Any one of those venues.
Yeah, very good. Well, thanks for sharing that, Bill. What a great offer for our listeners, right? To be able to pick up the phone and to connect if you're interested in learning more about Bill studies and being able to implement it and makes an impact with clients. But I'll make sure all of those links are definitely in the show notes.
Excellent. That's terrific. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Bill, for sharing your strategies, tips, and resources, helping our listeners to break through their obstacles.
Well, Warren, thank you. Thank you for what you do. The podcast is great, and it's been an honor to have a conversation with you. So thanks so much.
Yeah, likewise. Well, this is your host, Warren Wandling, saying until next time, be resilient.